it's just a phase. Just relax. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? Why am I uptight and sensitive? Well, maybe there's nothing wrong with me, and they're just not seeing what I'm seeing. Have you heard these phrases before? I know I have. I've been dealing with anxiety and depression on and off since I started high school. And I know I'm not alone. Despite how socially progressive 2016 may be, these phrases are still the social norm. Folks, this is what we call the mental health stigma, and it's quite troubling. Society should view mental health just as it would physical health, as an integral and inclusive part of wellness. That's why today I want you to understand that mental disorders are a medical condition. The problem is rooted in how we view mental disorders and why it matters to stifle the mental health stigma. This brings me to my first point. Mental disorders are medical conditions. The mental processes involved in mental disorders make it just as real as the common cold. In a 2012 article in Monitor on Psychology, Ware states that all mental processes are brain processes, and therefore all disorders of mental functioning are biological diseases. The only difference here is that the organ of interest is the brain, not the heart or the pancreas. But the same principles apply. She also goes on to say that all chronic diseases have behavioral components, but they also have biological components. These include the neurotransmitters, which are the messengers between nerves. Too much or too little of one messes all the brain chemistry up. My primary care physician once told me that everyone is wired differently. Ware also states in a 2012 article titled "The Roots of Mental Illness, How Much of Mental Illness Can the Biology of the Brain Explain?" When it comes to mental illness, the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't apply here. Mental disorders are likely to have more than one cause. Think of it as the brain circuitry can work just fine, and the mental processes are actually what are causing it to short circuit. With that being said, it's not always in the individual's control. Just as it's not under our control all the time that we contract a cold or get the flu. We wouldn't blame someone for sneezing, so why should we blame someone with anxiety for having a panic attack? My second point is, how we view mental disorders is the problem. These intrinsic and extrinsic forces play a part in how we deal with our inside and outside world. And it changes our views. For example, brain chemistry determines how we interact with our outer world, and culture is what affects our inner world. And culture can grow negative beliefs which perpetuate the problem. In a 2014 article in Psychological Science and the Public Interest, Corrigan, Druss, and Perlich note that, from a public standpoint, stereotypes depicting people with mental illness as being dangerous, unpredictable, responsible for their illness, generally incompetent, can lead to active discrimination, such as excluding people with these conditions from employment and social or educational opportunities. Which also means that society is taught to oversimplify mental disorders. In that same 2014 article in Psychological Science in the Public Interest, they say an example of this is cultural norms and perceptions determine social indicators of mental illness, thereby impacting stigmatizing cues. The government also notes this discrimination problem. There's certain legislation involved in it. Again, in that 2014 article titled The Impact of Mental Illness on Seeking and Participating in Mental Health Care, Corrigan, Druss, and Perlich state that the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, the Mental Health Parity Act of 1996, the Medicare Improvements for Patients and Providers Act, the Paul Wellstone and Pete Domenici Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008, and the Affordable Care Act of 2010 serve to protect people with mental illness from discriminatory actions. This leads me to my third and final point. The mental health stigma problem is so important because people's lives are at stake. Mental health stigma deters people that need help from getting it. Druss, Perlich, and Corrigan state in their 2014 article, The Impact of Mental Illness, Stigma on Seeking and Participating in Mental Health Care, that it becomes a particular concern when it undermines seeking out and participating in services demonstrated effectiveness in reducing dysfunction and disability and promoting recovery, referred to as evidence-based services. So it's not just our words and actions that we need to be mindful of. We need to be mindful of other people that have these problems, and especially college students. It can affect our whole lives if we don't get help in college. The displays of discrimination can develop into self-stigma and can lead to the why try effect. I'm just going to get ridiculed anyway, so why should I go and get help? And Chon, Ferrier, Gulliver, Bennett, and Griffiths explain in a 2016 article titled University Students' Views on the Perceived Benefits and Promotions of Seeking Help for Mental Health Problems on the Internet, that the negative outcomes associated with untreated mental disorders in college students include poor interpersonal relationships, lower engagement in campus activities, and increased risk of educational dropout. The disorders don't discriminate, so neither should we. The key here is empathy. Corrigan, Druss, and Perlich, in a 2014 article titled The Impact of Mental Health Stigma on Seeking and Participating in Mental Health Care, again they say research suggests that personal familiarity and experience with mental illness may be inversely related to stigma. Other factors, on the other hand, negative prior experiences with mental health providers and social support availability and cultural beliefs may discourage help seeking. So maybe think twice before you share your negative experience with this. You don't know who you're deterring. In conclusion, I stand firm in the fact that society should view mental health as an integrally inclusive part of wellness, just as physical health. That's why it's important to remind you that mental disorders are medical conditions and they have biological components. The problem with this is how we view mental disorders. Society is conditioned to ridicule those with those mental disorders, and that's the mental health stigma. We need to stifle this stigma because lives are at stake. My hope here is not that we accept everything to the point where there's no rules, but to be mindful that we're all wired differently. And those close to us grow us through it, not throw us through it. Thank you.